Hello, hello, everybody. We will be starting in just 1 minute. We had a minor snag. We'll be on in 1 second. Just thank you for your patience. We'll be on in about 1 second. Just hold on. All right. Good evening, everyone. We are live here on Zoom and also on the Urban Education Mixtape YouTube page. My name is Rand Miller. I am the founder of the Urban Education Mixtape, which is a online blog to support urban educators as well as urban parents. And tonight we are proud to present to you a talk with an expert with regards to Black history. Tonight's subject is teaching Black history at home and teaching Black history at school. We are going to be speaking with, in a few moments, the executive director of the New Jersey Amistad Commission, Dr. Stephanie Harris. She'll be joining us to provide us with some expertise on how to do this very thing both at school and at home. But I just wanted to briefly mention before we get into everything. First, thank you for joining us. We're going to have two more of these sessions. The next session will be on February 23rd at 7 p.m. That will be with Ms. Zaretta Hammond. That will be regarding teaching Black history culturally competently. And then also we'll have another one the very next day with Dr. Travis Bristol from the University of California at Berkeley, teaching Black history to the educators. So we will be having both of those. So again, thank you for joining us. We hope that you will join us for those two sessions on the 23rd and the 24th. So just real quick, this whole idea came from when we talk about Black history, we talk about some of the things that we all know, the people, places, things, the events. And this is always an opportunity to introduce some great information and great topics to young people as well as adults who may not be as aware of what it is that Black History Month is. So what we want to do is, again, provide this opportunity for everyone to be a part and to learn and get some information. And yeah, that's what we're looking to do tonight. So we're glad that everyone has joined us. And we have with us Dr. Harris now. Dr. Harris, I'm trying to get your your unmute together. Hold on 1 second.
I'm unmuted. I got it.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
How
Awesome.
you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I am good. I am good. I am busy. I am good busy. It's Black History Month.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
this is our time to shine right now, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for agreeing to join us. Certainly a pleasure to speak with you on this topic and glad to have you with us to provide your expertise. So before we get in, I just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and introduce the Amistad Commission and sort of the work that you've been engaging in and sort of how, you got started into this work.
So I'm Dr. Stephanie James Harris. I am the executive director of the New Jersey Amistad Commission, in out of the New Jersey Department of Education. And this work is, I guess, is close to my soul. I love the study of African American experience. I really do. I've loved it since I was a little girl. But the responsibility of the Amistad Commission, the purview of my office, is for the Afro-American history inclusions and infusions into the K through 12 curriculum for the state of New Jersey. for social studies, and now because of the past legislation, all other places applicable. So it is a huge lift for New Jersey. I'm proud of the work. It's had its challenges. The law passed originally in 2002. We had a state office that was created in 2005. I've been with the commission since 2006. I've been their executive director since 2007, I believe. And right now, even in the reality of these times that we're in, when so many people are really want to understand sort of the narrative of African-American history and their intersection with American history, New Jersey is still the only state that has an office that's responsible for these kind of inclusions. And I am the only African-American or agency that is doing that. And I'm the only executive director in the nation. So it's kind of hard. A good thing and a bad thing at the same time.
Gotcha. Understandable. Understandable. And absolutely, the work that you folks are doing under your leadership is definitely needed. And I know that a number of other states does have some sort of curriculum for this, but we definitely know that New Jersey is at the forefront. So thankfully, that is true. So I wanted to just jump into these questions. First, I was explaining before you arrived sort of the genesis of this topic in particular. And so I remember a couple of years ago, I was reading in a report from the Southern Law Poverty Center, talking about how enslavement is not taught properly. And a lot of times it's because a lot of white educators want to be politically correct. They are also not as versed on the topic. And so that sort of took me to a place of, this idea that, one, we do need folks to be a little bit more versed, but also our history doesn't start with enslavement in the United States, right? I often hear Dr. Greg Carr talk about how there are classics. They speak of the classics of like Virgil and Homer, but they don't
Where
talk
they learn from.
Yeah, exactly. But they don't talk about the classics in Africa. So I just wanted to start off the discussion with this question. How do we get away from the boilerplate Black history stuff, the MLKs and the enslavement? And how do we start to really dive deep into real Black history as it's integrated throughout world and American history?
I think we need to stop quantifying it and siloing it and calling it Black history. And I'm not saying that it is not the history of African-American people. What I'm saying is that when you use terminology like that, you silo it, right? It becomes something that we think of as separate and apart. Just like when you discuss talking about, the history of enslavement. And I use it as a verb purposely, right? Because there is no such thing as a slave as a noun, right? It is a verb because I want it to be a reminder every time I even say it out of my mouth that it was an action done to a people. It was not the people. And so I think that even that switch of the verbiage makes a big difference, because then you begin to say, well, this is an action done to the people, then who were the people? Because they had a history, a language, a civilization, a long and rich one that was much before their interactions with the act of enslaving them. And when you talk about the studies of, even as the quote unquote, what the textbooks would call slavery, they handle it as an incident. And I think that's some of the problem. The thing that I think all of America grapples with, and especially in our education environment and institutions, is the depth and breadth of what that intersection of enslavement meant for the global system, in its economics, in its community development, in all industry, in regards to the galvanization of wealth and disbursement of wealth across the globe. It was a worldwide phenomenon that pretty much made a decision about the enslavement of a particular people on a continent, right? Because I'm not even going to say a race of people. I'm going to say on a continent of people, enslaved them and dispersed them all over. And so when you think about it in those times or in those terms, then you can see it, why it should be handled so much larger than an incident, because there's no place, there's no touchstone for American history prior to 1865, and then thereafter, I will say, in regards to its legacies, that cannot be taught looking at it through that lens. If you talk about the economic development of America, it's there. If you talk about the reality of its infrastructure, it's there. If you talk about the reality of its democratic processes and civics engagements, it's there. If we talk about its arts and culture, it's there. And so we are there in all instances of it, which is why I think that, it's very important that we think about the reality of making sure this is infused throughout, because if you do not, then you really do a disservice and discredit the narrative of our history and our intersections in all places of the globe.
Yeah, yeah. How do you think you touched on something where you talk about power, and you talk about, the way that our history really had a lot to do with sort of how power was created and how these systems were grafted. How do we start to, or let's put it this way, how do districts, teachers, even parents begin sort of discussions about history in terms of power dynamics and a way of empowering young people to understand the ways in which this history of the way that our folks, our people have been utilized? How do we get to that power discussion? That's something that people don't want to talk about.
Well, people always say that, the question is whether or not, African Americans can be prejudiced or whether or not it can be racist, right? And I think that all of us have prejudgments about people. I think that's human nature. We see people, and that it's not always a bad thing to be able to say that we are making a quick assessment. Now, what we do with that quick assessment, I think that's human nature, that we all do it, right? What we can do with that means how we prejudice ourselves against them or for them, or maybe just observations. But we have the power to do something to them because of those prejudgments, or when we make these blanket sort of structural institutionalizations of structural things based on those prejudgments without really and then making them so blanket that they're not even effectuating and talking about the particular person, but a swath of people. Then we look at power dynamics. I think the reality is that the only way we're going to get there for students and teachers is we really begin to look at it in regards of how we develop our institutions. And what I will say is that when students are really given a full knowledge and a full understanding of our collective histories, and that's not just African American history, just our histories, right? And when they're able to see it, and it's done in a way that really does give them the historical facts, the primary documents, the conversations, if you could, using a terminology for teachers, and doing it in Socratic seminars, when they're able to kind of able to weigh and think about ideas and argue particular points or see different points of view, then they begin to uncover and discuss and question these power dynamics. It becomes very evident for them. But we don't often teach social studies in that manner. We do it in a way that is usually rote memorization of people, places, and things that really does not get them to the place of any kind of deep thinking, critical analysis, ability to sort of strategize and understand thoughts, or to read those kind of resources. Most, a lot of them still are reading textbooks as opposed to primary sources. I like primary sources. I know that everything is subjective, but if I'm going to have to make a debate about somebody's particular positioning about something, I want to read what their position was. I don't want you to tell me what their position was. Now, we can use secondary sources as well, but I do believe that when you really begin to talk about these kind of issues, students really need to be able to be engaged with it. It's not tied up in a neat little bow. It's not going to be about rote memorization. I think sometimes we have to make a decision about whether or not we want kids to memorize the data or whether we want them to synthesize the thought. Right? If that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, you gave me two things to think about. I want to start with this one first. For the teacher or even the parent that hears you and says, you know what, yeah, I need to find different sources than what I'm used to. Where do they go to look for those documents?
So I will share this, and this is not a shameless plug because you asked the question. When the Amistad Law passed, and when we began to kind of look and think about best practices and even resource development, we did a survey, and I sent out sort of a study for all the kinds of textbooks and what was in circulation in New Jersey. And recognizing that the infusion law and the infusion plan was something a little different than a lot of other states had done. And even, I guess, an additional or additional step in regards of a fully infused or a equalized and demarginalized history, right? As opposed to, and I love courses of African American history. I'm a student of that. I love it. I will say that first. But I will say that a lot of districts and a lot of, the initial steps was the demand for African American history and courses, which I understand. We needed that. We needed that space. We needed the scholarship. We needed the research developed. We needed a space for it to become and to be thought of as a history that was worth studying and was worth the credits in college courses, in high schools, et cetera. But as we began to look at how we would infuse it and how it should be meshed and merged inside, it should not be something that's siloed. There wasn't any resources that did it well. And so what we did is, especially for New Jersey, is that we looked at the textbooks. It's like almost 60 textbooks in circulation for history, especially in social studies. And just looking at an analysis when we were talking about what an infusion plan would look like and how much material would be in there, not the mentions and, at the end of the chapter, not the heroes and holidays that sometimes appear, when they talk about one particular person, that makes every African American feel like they're an exceptionalist as opposed to the reality that is who we are, right? There wasn't any done. So what we did was we took the time to actually create an online resource for teachers that could be utilized in schools and companion with any particular textbooks in circulation. Really thinking about taking a step back and thinking of it as sort of a K through, I'll say 16, if you consider college, if you talk about career and college readiness. That modality, if it's K through 16, then you spend the time to really think about by the time students enter college, what would they need to know to really say that they understood our equalized and the equity of our collective contributions. And if that is the case, then we need to create the resources that can be in a companion piece. So our online resources are free to every New Jersey teacher, PTA, museum, pre-service program, College of Education, library, museum, etc. It can stand alone. It is model curriculum work. It's lesson plans. It is, document-based questions, timelines, primary sources, dialogues and plays, links for other resources, etc. It's packed full of information, organized by English language arts and social studies, which can be inversed depending on what class you're going to teach. And rubrics and kind of analysis, lectures for teachers, the ability to, for download for students, translatable to about 120 different languages in its entirety, able to manipulate in regards of a size and structure. It has even a embedded thesaurus and dictionary within it. But we were trying to meet the need of districts because we realized there were such disparities in what they were using. And the only way to really begin to even show them the depth and breadth of who we are is to make sure that we provided them the resources to do so.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. What about the parents, right? So what does a parent do to do all of that stuff? If they access the commission page and they see all the resources and they're like, whoa, this is a lot. What do they do, right? For the parent that isn't a teacher who's home with their kid, possibly because they're doing remote learning and their child may be a little bit exhausted from all the Zoom calls and things like that. How do they go about teaching Black history in a way that's fun, but it's not sounding preachy or sounding like they're in school, but something that's interactive, that's something that the whole family can enjoy?
I will tell you what I used to do with my own sons, and they hated it. And I think as they got older, they appreciated it, right? My disclaimer with them was that, we were Black excellence, right? And so that I did not want them to feel, because this work really is in my blood. I did not want them to feel like that our contributions was something that would be relegated, and that we would find them all over. And so whenever they had any kind of project, as a parent myself, when my children were younger, and they're now in college, I have a freshman and a junior in college right now. But when they were little, whenever they had any kind of project, whenever they had anything to do, on any level, in any area, I would always play this game with them. I'm like, I bet you can find someone African American that fits into that criteria. And they used to laugh at me and they'd be like, oh, yeah, yeah. But I found that it almost challenged them, right, to actually go do it. I can remember when my youngest was in elementary school, he had a project on ice cream. I don't even know. It was a science project or something on ice cream or like refrigerator something. And I said, I bet you can find someone. Mommy, whatever. He ended up finding Augustus Jackson, who was actually and he did a project on him, who was in Philadelphia. He was actually in the White House. He was a part of Dolly Madison's White House. He was one of his, I guess, her confection, maybe chef, I guess that's the proper term. He was the one who actually created Dolly Madison ice cream. And when he left the White House, he opened an ice cream parlor on South Street in Philadelphia. So, I use that as an example because as a parent, I would not have known that. I didn't know who necessarily Augustus Jackson was before my son did the project. But because I challenged him to think about the African-American contribution, I sent him on a path to discover somebody that he was able to introduce to the class. And so when you think about African-American history, we're not just talking about the person. We're talking about civics education. We're talking about an African-American that was in the White House. You're talking about someone that was there during the War of 1812. We're talking about, it becomes so much broader. You're talking about business entrepreneurship. You're talking about city of Philadelphia. You're talking about the businesses on the 7th Ward. One example, there's a cross sections of histories in which he touches on. And that's, I guess, what I mean for parents. We have the ability to be able to do that, and really just make sure that our kids are plugged into a understanding. And that's not just for Black parents, right? That works for that works for other parents as well. I would even say I would challenge maybe some parents of other persuasions to do that, to expand for their children the ability to be able to see a collective contribution, to understand who people are and who they have been in history. They're not an anomaly that just kind of dropped out the sky with excellence.
How do parents go about encouraging their school districts, their schools and their districts to start implementing some of the things that you've discussed here? Maybe they want to do it, not just Black parents, but white parents, folks that are just like, we need to get this history in our schools. What do they do if they're not satisfied with the way that their schools or districts are handling it right now?
This is what I will say, and I will tell you that I think all of us had a learning curve. And because of that, I'm thank you for the platform to be able to explain this, because I think if everybody understands the semantics of how curriculum is organized and who plays what role in what, it will help greatly. And it will also help me greatly with the overhaul and making sure that all districts are in compliance. So the Department of Education prior to this law had never really had a law that actually said what had to be included in a particular content area, right? The Department of Education and state law generally creates the content standards. And from the standards, a district is able to create their own individual curriculum mapping. So they're able to decide at which space a student learns that information. So, and usually it coalesces with these standards, but it also gets to be shaped by, their benchmark testing, statewide testing assessments, et cetera. With the idea that by the end of the 12th grade year, the students will have all of those knowledge bases in the standards, et cetera. However, and districts are assessed on the standards, right? They're assessed in their ability for those standards to be translated to assessments. However, for a state law like this, you need to understand that if you want to make it the responsibility of the district or enforcement to own it, for them to be in their shop, and I have said it to anybody who will listen, the best way to do it, the most effective mechanism, is to step to a school board at a public meeting and ask the school board to adopt the legal mandate in whole. Because once a school board passes it as a mandate, it becomes a district-wide policy, and they are held accountable for fulfilling it. It is already a state statute, so they would be in compliance to the statute. But the enforcement mechanism beyond the regular sort of quality controls that the state does is really at the district level, because the district then becomes accountable. The school board then becomes accountable. Superintendents then become accountable, because it can become part and parcel to their directives to their school district, their curriculum directors, etc. Now, I can help them in how to frame it in regards of what it looks like. The curriculum map, the suggestions, the books, the resources, the PD training for teachers, etc. But in order for it to be something that you know will come into a compliance, once it's owned by a school board, they can't step away from it. If it's not adopted, it does not have to be that school board's policy. Adopted in policy, in your wheelhouse. That's what I have to say to everyone. And there are 600 plus school districts in the state of New Jersey that all must do that in order for you to see full compliance.
Okay, that's good. Let me get to one of the folks that are on the Zoom. They had a question, and it was something that you touched on, Dr. Harris. Their question is how to make African-American history more engaging and collaborative for students rather than a subject of rote memorization. Did you want to touch on that a little bit more?
I think it's the way in which we teach it, right? You know, because it's not even, I don't even know, I think it's a problem with just, not just African-American history, but just the way in which we have, for me, I think the point of, especially a social studies class, if you look at the integrity and, you know, holistically, it is the space in which we are supposed to be socializing individuals, our students, to be able to understand the world in which they live in and to be able to assess and, you know, theorize on the history, and also being able to move forward, right? That is where we socialize. But it also becomes one of the decision-making of probably one of the most political decisions that we make in regards to what we put in or don't put into students, right? Because those political decision-makings about curriculum, although most of us don't pay any attention to it, really do shape the next generation of leaders. Because if it is not done in a way in which they do understand, if it doesn't demarginalize, if it's not inclusive, if there are certain messages that are not addressed, if there are certain things they do not understand, then we will have a next generation of adults that are not able to engage in a level in which we're saying we want them to. And then we have adults that have spaces that are still reflective of what was ever able to be put in or not put in, because that's just as political, right? To their frameworks, their thinking as they're developing. So I think when we get to the space where we stop teaching to test, but actually teach to grow, right? And maybe we think about a different kind of test, right? I would mention, I think, you know, to its credit, I know that it wasn't rolled out correctly, and it was very difficult in regards to what people were looking at in regards to the PARCC assessment. It was a shift between memorization of fact to assessing skill, right? Could they understand main idea? Could they galvanize and synthesize different documents and come up with a thesis statement? Could they, you know, compare and contrast? That is what we would like to see. It's unfortunate about how the way it rolled out and what it meant for districts. But that is what I believe needs to happen for us to really do make this engaging, because kids love those kind of conversations. They do want to engage in that, and they do want to understand the world they live in. Most kids, most adults don't want to memorize anything. Why would you? Because it leaves as soon as you memorize it. That's all it's for.
Yeah. Now I have to ask you this. I was a former history teacher. I taught high school history, American history, all those sort of things. And I remember when the tragedy happened with Trayvon Martin, when he was murdered. And a lot of my students were asking questions like, why did this happen? What's going on, and all those things. And so I reached out to my principal, and I asked if I could use a text that was not a regular text. It was The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And so
Wonderful.
I taught a class on that entire book and gave my students an opportunity to really explore these themes of systemic racism, mass incarceration,
Mhm.
prison industrial complex, school to prison pipeline. We were able to talk about all of those things. And it was so enriching. I feel like right now we're at the same place with
We
the
are.
information that happened, right?
We are.
And there are a lot of educators who are just like, I know I need to talk about this. I don't know where to go with this. I'm not as versed in the history that led and facilitated these sort of things. Folks aren't aware of that. This isn't something that, we've seen this before. We've seen it in Wilmington. We've seen it in Tulsa.
Right.
We this before. So for those teachers that are looking for like, how do I go about talking to my kids about that? Even in white teachers in white school districts with white children, whose parents may or may not want to hear this, where do they go? What do they do if they want to teach this?
Are you asking me for a book recommendation?
Anything.
I will get, so I'm going to tell you that the book that my go-to right now, and I will say this, you are correct, we are in the same space again, right? We are responding to children's desire to learn. They want to understand the why. And that's what I mean in regards to why I think we need to move away from teaching rote memorization and really for them to understand the theoretics, the systems, the realities that we have been socialized in so that they can break free of them and then make strategic decisions about what we don't need to repeat, right? Because if we don't get them, it's almost like, I guess, we're going to give them the red pill or the blue pill, right? What we're going to do, right? But because that is demanding, we're seeing that demand again. I spend a lot of time with districts that are struggling with the same question you ask, or asking for resources or how to sort of shift the conversation. And to the credit of a lot of districts across New Jersey, teachers are asking, I need to be able to do this, and where do I learn, right? And I'm doing a lot of trainings on that. People are really not just wanting to know the history, but even how to handle it, how to have courageous conversations, how to deconstruct race, these concepts, etc. I spent a great deal of the summer and in the fall kind of trying to think about some resources that were really good. And I know that I love STAMP from the beginning. I love the children's portion of it is stamped. I'm going to tell you that the book that has really shifted me, and I think are answering all of the questions, is Isabel Wilkerson's Caste.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity to read it. I probably could be her new PR and marketing rep because it is fantastic about the way in which she weaves it. And what I really enjoy is that, I know that, I got my PhD in Afroecology and Afro-American studies. I love reading I love reading it, right? I love, delving into theoretical frameworks and et cetera. I know that is not everybody's cup of tea, right? And so what I love about Isabel Wilkerson is that because she is a journalist, she weaves such a beautiful narrative. It is one that is very straightforward. You understand her comparisons, her analysis, and she is very clear about weaving the history in. And she puts it in a way, and because the cast, if you read the back cover, it might be something you say, I'm not sure, because it's framed as a comparison analysis between the caste systems and what a caste system is of America, Nazi Germany, and India, right? And so it might seem like it's going to be very esoterical. It is not. What it actually does, it gives you a perspective about it being these kind of things that are happening as being a global phenomenon with some great similarities. And it also gives you a sense of how the systems have developed piggybacking off of each other, because it gives a lot of examples from history how Nazi Germany learned eugenics from America.
Yeah, yeah.
And therefore, what we found in Nazi, in the concentration camps was actually just a stronger manifestation of American eugenics, or that some of, or looking at, civil engagement and civil unrest coming to us in regards to the strategy for the untouchables or undesirables
Mhm.
to America, because literally African Americans in regards to the legal system were America's undesirables or untouchables, right? So it's just a really good way to be able to see it in a larger scale system to then be able to engage with how to get out of it. She does not say she has the answers, but she really rips off the veil and makes you think of it in a really succinct way. So, I think that that is a good start. I think the conversations that will come out of that, even with students, will be one that will really make them be able to think about being change makers and being engaged, and will make them activists and really begin to have an active engagement with how to dismantle some of these systems, because they have to see them first.
Yeah. Two things out of that book that really blew me away was when Dr. King was offended when he went to India and he was called undesirable. He knew how he looked in America, but didn't expect that outside of America, that in that mirror. And he had to have a come to Jesus moment, if you will, with himself to really understand who he was and the relation between the two. And the second, probably the most impactful, was the idea that the Nazis thought that the one drop rule was a step too far. That
Exactly.
I'm like, what?
Well, because America has this, because we have decided the reality of race, right? So what I love about Isabel Wilkerson is she takes it above race, right? She doesn't just make it a black-white binary, and she even sees how we created it, right? Because we have such a difficult time not seeing it as real. Watching her talk about how it was created and how other countries look at it makes a lot of sense. And you realize how ridiculous it is and antiquated it is that we decided a physical attribute could have power, but I guess that's what we were talking about earlier, right? Power structures that are given. It's really a physical attribute. We made a decision about that physical attribute becoming a powerful mechanism to be able to relegate people to a caste system.
Yeah. So I recommend that book.
My favorite was Miss. I have to tell you, as an African-American woman, my favorite chapter was about Miss. And I would just tell the audience, it was an African-American, she was telling the story, and because she's a journalist, she's interviewed, a lot of people and met a lot of people. And she was talking about the degradations and the insults that, because of a particular caste system, that even when their intellect or their education or their professional attainments have meant that they should be in spaces of respect, because of the caste system, they're often mistreated. And so she made, sort of that statement, but then she gave, her story. And she told a story about a man that she interviewed whose mother, I believe she was a college professor. And he said in her community, in the church, in every place where he lived with her, she was always respected, called properly. She was Mrs., or she was, I don't even know, I think professor, and etc. He said, but he hated going, and he had grown up in the segregated South. He hated going with his mother to any areas in which she was interacting with Caucasians, because she said they always called her by her first name. But they called her, auntie or something. He said that was so derogatory. And he promised himself that if he ever had a girl child, he would not let her ever have to answer to any kind of insult to her character. And so what he did, I thought rather brilliantly, is he asked his wife to name his daughter Miss as her first name.
Yeah.
And so I don't even remember what their last name is, but I'll use mine, right? So her name became Miss James, right? And so he said that it forced everybody to have to speak to her with that level of respect. And he said that he was telling a story about how, the high school principals used to call him down. She won't tell me her name. What is her? And she said, I'm Miss James. What is your name? I am Miss James. He said, and he said he loved watching people struggle, and he knew where they were meeting her and what they felt about her by the level in which they struggled with engaging with her name. I just thought that was brilliant. That was my favorite chapter. I said, I should have done that. I love it.
Yeah, that was a great story. Yeah, that was awesome. So let me ask another question from the chat, and this is probably more for teachers and for parents. All the stuff that you're talking about is great information, is dope. What about the folks who are like, this is awesome, but this just feels like more work? Like I'm working all this time, I'm juggling kids and all this stuff. And you want me to teach this at home? I need to go through all the, I'm the teacher, I got lesson plans, I got grading, and I got to make sure I'm staying on the scope and sequence. Like this is exhausting. How do we not make this a chore and really encourage teachers as well as parents to view this as something that's so important? I'm sure you get this question when you're doing PDs with teachers who are like, you're giving me more work to do. What would be your advice in that regard for parents and teachers?
So as for teachers, this is what I tell them all the time. The reality of an infusion plan means that it doesn't have to be relegated. For example, your scope and sequence says that you need to cover progressive era, organizations and their impact on how they shifted the social structure of urban cities, right? And I just gave you like the scope and sequence standard, right? So for most people, if you were teaching history, their go-to might be the Hull House, right? They might look at, and I'm just giving examples. I know the teachers, I know people, I don't know what you're talking about, but they would give an example of one that would standardly be used, maybe one from the textbook. The reality of how we have so relegated it, and this is what I mean by an infusion plan, NAACP or the Urban League can be taught in that same way. Because the reality is that they too follow the same modality. Because we have seen them in silo, we forget that they were organized at the exact same time under the same exact premise. Sometimes the reality is that you can do the small gesture and fulfill not only the mandate, but also shift the discourse of how students feel about those organizations and understanding their contributions to the larger historical narrative and American history by just making that mention. Because if I'm talking about a progressive era organization and I use the NAACP, all of a sudden the student understands its impact. It's not just a civil rights organization from the 60s. You understand where it came from, who were the organizers, the whys, the hows. We can begin to see that they're going to be looking for its influence from from 1909 straight through. They're not going to be satisfied when they get to their three classes in ninth grade, if they learned that in sixth grade, and they only hear about their influence or what they did after 1954. They're going to ask the question, well, wait, I thought I was taught it was a progressive era organization, so what did it do, right? Most people don't think of the Urban League as a group that was about social workers, right? Or maybe we look at the impact of the YWCA and why African Americans YWCAs came, or the Phyllis Wheatley clubs that had to take African American women because they couldn't stay at the YWCA. We don't teach it in a way that we can do some quick nuances to really shift how students think and also be able to expand ourselves, right? And I'm a teacher. I'm also a student. There's no way in the world that you can be a teacher and not still be a student. Because if not, the material becomes stale. Scholarship comes all the time. We cannot get to the place where we're pulling lesson plans out of the bottom drawer. I know about that. I was there. I've done it. But that is not the space that we can stay as teachers. I don't want to pile it on.
Yeah.
But I will help you find the resources to be able to strategize and do it.
Yeah, that's good. I have to ask you, it came up and I'm going to put you in a situation.
Okay.
You are called to be an advisor for a private school, and this private school is out in the state of Utah. And they have got some feedback and pushback from a situation where they allowed parents to opt out of learning Black history. And so they have recanted that and said, no, we're not doing that. We're teaching it. They don't know what to do. They're in damage control. So they call you in as much to help with the damage control as much as it is to help them with actually doing the work. How would you go about advising the educators, the leaders in that school?
So first, I would tell them that the first mistake is that they made Black history even see it's in siloed, that they thought that they could opt out of it. See, I'm going to tell you a little story about what happened in New Jersey. And this is a real example of something that sincerely, I can't even begin to tell you about. 600 plus school districts. New Jersey is the fifth most segregated state in the nation. Not Chicago, not North Carolina, South Carolina, not New Jersey.
Jersey, that's right.
And the reality of where districts are in regards of sometimes the racial composition of districts is a wide swath. I was in a district in a rural area of New Jersey. I won't even identify. And was talking about the mandate and looking at the curriculum map and really helping them look at not only compliance, but where things could fit in and what I saw was missing. And one of the conversations with their curriculum director, the person hired to actually do this work, was that she wasn't sure of the necessity of this level of detail because she did not have students of color, nor really that many educators of color in the district. And I was livid. I thought of it. I said, okay, I'm not going to get upset, right? So, you do this job long enough, you figure out how you're going to do it with a little bit of humor.
Mhm.
So I agreed, okay, not a problem. So she kind of was taken aback. She didn't think I was going to agree with her, and I didn't. I was just trying to be funny. And I said, so let me just. I said, I'm gonna go there with you, and we're gonna say that why you feel that that's a justifiable reason. I said, so are you gonna be okay if I leave here and let you make that agreement? If I go to Newark and I tell the teachers in Newark or the students in Newark that just like you don't need to know about George Washington Carver, they don't need to know who George Washington is.
Mhm.
And she was taken aback. Oh, why would no? I said, you cannot justify why you feel that George Washington is more important than knowing George Washington Carver, unless you're making a decision about the scale of why they should be. So we cannot silo this stuff out. There should not have ever been an option out. So the apology is not about the damage control of what they did. The apology is that we have made a mistake about how we have framed history. And so thereby we need to address how we have even gone about the teaching of this history to even give parents the illusion that we will want to leave it out. See, if we make a different comparison, and I think that's the problem, even what Elizabeth Wilkerson said about the reality of how we think race is so firmly, it's real, but it's not. If we talk about it in regards of characters or like physical characteristics, then, or even gender, right? There's no way in the world that we would ever accept anybody saying, well, I think I want my student to opt out of learning about women.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like, I don't want my students to know anything about people that are over 5'7". I don't want my students to learn anything about hair, people that have dark hair or blonde hair or wear glasses. These are physical characteristics. That is all that color is. And we have made, I know the race in the way it's been applied in the power structures is real. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we cannot silo it. So the real crutch is that they gotta bring it back and really do the deep dive on how they even arrived at sending that option home. Shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. We got another question from the chat. This question's asking, what do you say to people of color who say that they don't see color, and why African Americans are so focused on color?
So I will say this. Everybody sees color, right? What they're saying is that they don't feel that they make decisions based on color, or they feel like they want to deconstruct and make sure that everything is equitable despite color, right? Everybody sees color. That is a reality, unless you are colorblind, and even colorblind people. My father's colorblind. He might not be able to identify the colors, but he sees the pattern of some variations, right? The reality is that I think that we are striving so hard to say that, and we don't want to be prejudicial, and so we've gone in complete opposition. There's no need to say we're colorblind. There's no need to not appreciate the diversity that is amongst us and the difference in which people come in points of view. Everybody has their own particular social and political based on how this world, how they have exchanged in this world. We can't deny that, right? We can rise against it. We can shift the systems. We can buck against the systems, right? We can do things like do a mechanism like name your daughter Miss, so that she doesn't have to, so that you can, do a small thing to actually make something greater come out of where she might be cast. But I think it does a disservice to all of us to say that we're colorblind and we don't see it. We do see it. What you're saying is that you don't want the world to be judged based on how people have been cast. But it's not about not seeing it. It's about attempting to not deal in it. And that's fine. That's fine. But let's at least call it what it is. None of us want to deal in it. And maybe that is the way in which people go about thinking that they're going to do it, make an efforts to overcome it, or make an efforts to make sure that it destabilizes sort of how people have been marginalized. Mm-hmm. But then let's say that then. I want to deal with everybody equitably. Let's not say we're colorblind.
Yeah, that's good. Final question from me. Let me ask you this. What do you say to the people, whether they be teachers or parents alike? What do you say to the folks that say, well, teaching about this stuff is too much for kids that are too young? Maybe we shouldn't talk about this for a certain age group. Maybe high schoolers, maybe we can discuss it, but they don't even look at the news. They're not even paying attention to what's going on. What do you say to those folks that think that this content, this history is too raw, if you will, for young ears?
So it depends on what you're going to do. I mean, everything needs to be age appropriate. I'm not asking them to be talking about slave pens in kindergarten, right? You wouldn't do that. Yeah. So, and this is the other thing. The problem is that everybody thinks if you make that statement, then you've quantified the entire history of who we are down to the atrocities of slavery, because we have a history that's much greater than that. If we make the statements that we want to be able to teach in diaspora and we shouldn't start with enslavement and that is not the sum total of who we are. But when I hear statements like that, I realize that is what you think the sum total of who we are. Because there is nothing there's 1,000 different ways in which you can approach our contributions to this nation that are not wrought with negativity. And if you truly believe that it's a huge lift, or it's going to bring down it will be not age appropriate, or that it would be something that would sadden students, and you really haven't delved into an appreciation for who we have been. And even if you have to tackle those issues, so if you were going to tackle those issues, I have a book that I use a lot when people ask me that question. It's called Barefoot, and it's a children's book. It's a read aloud book. It is the premise of the story is that, and if you look at the cover, you see a foot, an African American foot, maybe like walking in a river or something like that in the woods at night. And the premise of the book is told from the perspective of children. I mean, of animals, right? So the animals are talking in the book. It's a children's book. And, as you read the book, the animals are talking, and they're talking about, assisting someone. And as you go through the book, they're saying, we need to make the water move, or the branches move, or, the owl, talk, Mr. Owl, make the branches move, Mr. Snake, ruffle the water, Mr. Worm, make sure that the ground, they're just talking and you don't realize what they're doing. As the book goes along, you recognize that the animals have been assisting freedom seekers. I'm not going to call them escaped slaves, right? Freedom seekers on the Underground Railroad. And that the animals have taken part in assisting those that they know are trying to get north by doing their part in the story. So a small story like that, first, second, third grade, by the time students get to it's sixth grade when you begin to talk about the Underground Railroad or enslavement or North and South, all that kind of stuff, the concept is there. I didn't tell them about what it meant to escape enslavement in kindergarten. I gave a book that was actually affirming to the ability, you know what I mean? And it was one that they will probably remember because I remember it. It's a beautifully written book about even how they purposely, as you know, people are after him, they're purposely distracting them so that they can't find him. They're helping to hide him in the woods and helping him on his way. That's age appropriate.
Mhm.
That's not heavy. That's not deep. That's something that can be used in a school district.
Mm, mm. Dr. Harris, you've given us a lot of gems tonight for us to take with us. I definitely appreciate it. Are there any last comments that you would want to share that maybe we didn't touch on?
No, I just well, I will say this. You know, I've done a couple of I've been doing programs, I guess, the last 2 weeks. You know, on for Black History Month, and one of the things that I had found that has been very interesting for a lot of students, and I think it can be done at home, even for for parents that might really just kind of want to do something to engage in the work. Is that I have been talking to a lot of school districts about the history around us, right? Because I think we were one of the original 13 colonies. We have a very rich history. There's a lot of intersections in African American, content, communities, etc., and spaces that have disappeared that we have forgotten that have happened all around us. And so perhaps even where we are, if we want to be able to honor the legacy of who, Dr. Woodson was and what the integrity of his intent was, is that students would understand our contributions, and maybe just even as a family, find out about the history of your town. Where do you live? Who lived there? What did what were the churches? I called my mother. I lived in Voorhees, I lived in Marlton, I currently live in Mercerville as an adult with my own children. But I called my mother because, the area that she used to live with in Marlton was originally right around the corner, was an all Black town. It was a haven. I was blown away. I didn't know that. So, I mean, and I began to research who bought the land and how he ended up with the plots and whatever. It's completely, it was over by Marlcrest and, area right there in Evesham. I had no idea.
Mm.
We were here, right? And so I think the markers, the history, it's there. Most of the towns have it somewhere. It's just not something that's done. So maybe even this month, if we begin to even appreciate the places in which we live, those that have come before us, because we're there because someone came before us. If we think about that, it becomes much less of a big lift, but something that we can all engage in as a point of pride.
Mm. How can folks find you on social media? How can they find the resources from the
Amistad Commission?
Yeah, how do they find?
We do have it's online. So the Amistad web-based curriculum resource is online. It is www.njamistadcurriculum.net. We made it very easy. That is the online resource for teachers that you can register and utilize. And even as parents, you can register and download and utilize. So it is not something that is siloed just to adults. Just to educators. And the office is right there in Trenton. You can always contact the office. We do have our webpage is right there on the Department of Ed. And they can send me an email at DOE. And I can reach back out to them. We do have a Facebook page. We do have a Twitter page. I think we have an Instagram page. I don't manage it. We have a commissioner that actually manages a lot of it. But we'll post lesson plans and different things. And so we try to stay active and engaged. It's a huge job and a big lift. And, I feel like maybe I'm aging myself a little bit. I'm trying to figure out how to stay engaged with all the mediums of social media. It's sometimes hard to manage after dealing with so many districts and doing things like this at night. But I'm trying.
No, that's all right. That's all right. You there. You working. Thank you so much. We want to definitely be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. We absolutely appreciate. You have given us a wellspring of knowledge and information that can help us along the way. Teachers, parents, even myself, I was writing stuff down like maybe I need to do this, that, and the third. So absolutely thank you. And we thank everybody for joining us for this installment of speaking with the experts for Black history. We have this on our YouTube page, so we will save this conversation. If anybody missed it, please share with your folks. This is free information, gems that you need to get your hands on. Dr. Harris, again, thank you so much. Humbled by your presence. We definitely appreciate you.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I do.